Lord forgive me for this trap shit. Sergeant Smack making backflip. Telly Hank did with the action. With the Vato speaking Spanish. Frank Matthews, how I vanish. Poof. Came back like I'm King Tut. Gold BBS is on a beamer. When Fat Cat was 10 queens up. Ball off the profit, not the re-up. Fly like Puerto Rican Jesus. Uptown like I'm Baby Maine. Just caught a touchdown from the Bay.
It was a rough courtship at times, but the marriage appeared imminent between Prince William County and the Walt Disney Company.
There was a time in the early 1990s when Disney was looking to open up their next theme park near Richmond, Virginia.
The city's murder rate soared and eventually doubled, making Richmond the second deadliest city per capita in the United States.
The plan was to call the park Disney America, and it was to be located in Haymarket, about 100 miles from Virginia's capital city of Richmond.
Unfortunately, it's going to have a great impact on the economic development and the tax revenue for not only Prince William County, but certainly Commonwealth of Virginia.
Disney planned to lay down a $650 million investment.
But during the final hours of the deal, there would be questions.
Let's get some more questions.
On a local radio show today, callers quizzed Governor Allen as to why Disney scrapped its plan to build a 3,000-acre theme park near Haymarket.
With any company that would seek to invest in Virginia, we stand ready to assist them in whatever way might be appropriate. But the next move is up to Disney.
But in the end, Disney would decide against the move.
And here at the state capitol, lawmakers joined Governor Allen in their disappointment. Some even blasted Disney, calling the move an 11th hour pullout.
I was disgusted with the way Disney acted. I don't know what the reason is, but I say good riddance.
Now, if you was to ask me what that reason was?
Crack. It's going nationwide, especially among the young. A drug so pure and so strong, it might just as well be called crack of doom. With not so happy endings are criminals who need money to buy drugs or who are on drugs. In the alphabet of illegal drugs, few have become so popular, so potent, so addictive, so fast as what's known on the street as crack. Since CBS News reporter Harry Smith first investigated this, the crack problem has become a crack crisis and it's spreading nationwide.
But that's only half the story, because when crack cocaine would come to town, it would bring a lot of money and a lot of murder.
Think of Richmond, Virginia, and you may think of a quiet southern city, unhurried and untroubled. But crime statistics out just this week tell a different story. They indicate Richmond has one of the highest murder rates in the country. And right now, police are coping with a crime spree that has shaken the city to its core.
Yes, it was the deadliest invasion since the Civil War. It ripped the guts right out of this city.
According to a July 1990 article from the Richmond Times-Dispatch, on September 25th, 1984, two notorious killers would meet up in a courtroom, one being Eugene Johnson, the other one being Daniel Flax. The article would make an effort to point out that according to the transcript of the trial, it would show that it was a strange one. When asked whether people shoot their friends, Daniel Flax would reply, "It all depends on what's what. It all depends on what the situation is, I guess." The article would go on that years later, this would prove a seemingly standard feeling amongst those in this underclass. Often friends who sat drinking together one day tried to kill each other several weeks later over drug deals that went bad. Now, that might be partly the case, but this is way, way deeper than that. And a war between those two that included 3 sets of brothers will have them shooting it out in the streets of Richmond for supremacy, almost making the city the murder capital and leaving businesses running for cover.
This is Afton Avenue in Southside. Used to be a drive-through crack market right here. 5 murders in this spot in a short period of time in 1993. But what's important about this spot is it illustrated the us against them philosophy of many people in this city. Back then, many of the folks in the poorest neighborhoods sided more with the young dealers than the police.
And the community engagement is definitely different today than it was 20, 25 years ago.
Back then, a woman on Afton told me she'd bring drinks to the dealers and drive them for a fee to King's Dominion, since some of them weren't old enough to drive, although they knew how to pull a trigger. Police got little cooperation when trying to solve murders and other crimes. At one point, detectives weren't even solving half the slayings. A series of daylight shootings in Center City were the final straws for the Broad Street and Gray Street business districts. Miller and Rhodes, Tallheimers, Barry Burke all went away.
It's been an uphill battle to keep Tallheimers in downtown Richmond, but today the fight is over and the city lost. After a reported loss of $7.5 million here in the last 2 years, Tallheimers' parent company is pulling up its anchor. The news delivers a blow to the city administration and its efforts to revitalize downtown retail.
And to some extent, it is almost like the Grinch who stole Christmas.
For nearby businesses like Penny Lane Pub, today's news puts the future in question.
Downtown Richmond is going to become a ghost town. And we've been here 13 years, and I just think what's happening to Richmond is sad.
Watch Pen and Pencil has been in Richmond next to Tallheimers for 50 years. Now the store will likely move out. But the news today was not a surprise.
It's not something that's just really earth-shattering to me. It was all everybody already knew. It was a process that we'll have to go through, and had to happen.
The war was said to have been started on May 24th, 1983, when Eugene Johnson and Sylvester Montage would shoot Daniel Flax 5 times while he sat in a car across the street from Schwarzschild's Jewelers on one of Richmond's busiest blocks, Broad Street. And from that point up until everybody was either arrested or dead, a time that would see the homicide rate nearly double in the mid-Atlantic city. Richmond, Virginia would become a bloodbath.
Drug-related shootings in Richmond, like this one from New Year's Day, are occurring at a rate higher than that of any other Virginia city. In the first 4 weeks of this year, Richmond has recorded 7 homicides. For the entire year of 1984, 78 people were murdered, the most in the state. It's that record that Councilman Henry Marsh and Walter Kenney want reversed. And they plan to do it by forming an 18-member citizen committee to look into ways of preventing crime in the capital city.
We don't believe that we have to accept the inevitability of increasing crime and high crime rates in our city. We think that this is something that we can do something about if we all work together as a community.
Marsh added that this citizen crime committee would be made up of 2 people from each of the 9 councilmatic districts in the city. This committee would be effective, according to Marsh, because it would employ citizens who see crime every day. One civic leader likes the committee idea, saying it would provide better cooperation between police and residents.
Like that. I think the police doing a wonderful job.
From the time that Daniel Flax was shot in 1983 to the time that everybody was either dead or off the streets, the murder rate in Richmond would jump by 66%, turning the already dangerous city deadly. And not all of the violence could be attributed to these 3 sets of brothers, but the Richmond Times-Dispatch would be able to track at least 9 slayings in 1987 that, according to the police, seemed to follow one thread or another of a complex web. Using that information, the paper would point out that if you subtracted those 9 murders from the 79 that was reported to the FBI that year, that would have dropped the number to around 69, low enough to keep the city out of the top 10. Instead, Richmond would have the 7th highest murder rate in the country that year, and it would only get higher. Some of the main catalysts for that bloodshed would be Daniel and Donald Flax just reaching adulthood as crack would arrive to town. The 2 brothers would go on to turn themselves into kingpins, but they would have rivals in the city. And the biggest and probably most dangerous was Eugene Johnson, who through the course of this war would end up beating 2 murder charges in the city of Richmond. Then you have his little brother Reggie, who would also at one time faced murder charges that would eventually be dropped due to failure of witnesses cooperating, and their younger brother, Herbert. The Johnsons would team up with another notorious set of brothers, Leonidas, Carlton, and Clayton Brown. Of those three, one would die in the streets during this war, with the other two receiving life sentences. At Eugene Johnson's trial in 1984 that I spoke on earlier, he would admit to shooting Daniel Flax in front of Schwarzschild's Jewelers on Broad Street in 1983, but in self-defense, and almost answering the questions himself that they would ask his rival. He would explain through his testimony that him and Daniel Flax was the furthest thing from friends, testifying that the two of them, along with their friends, had been beating one another up and shooting at each other for years on the streets of Richmond. Eugene Johnson and those testifying on his behalf would tell the jury that the conflict had escalated and was something similar to a war. When his lawyer, William Futches, asked him, "Eugene, are you afraid of Daniel Flax?" he would reply, "I like living." And when his lawyer would go on to ask him for a better answer, not sure if he was playing for the court or speaking from the heart, but he would say, "I was afraid. I know what he would try to do. The court doesn't really know what's going on. The only people that do is the people that's involved, because I'm the main person. They wanted to kill me." He would end sarcastically saying, "I don't want to stay around when they catch you coming in the courtroom." But he wouldn't really have to worry about coming or going into the courtroom, because unlike the two murder charges that he would be convicted of shooting Daniel Flax in 1983 and sentenced to 12 years. And he would testify to all of that in 1984. By the time 1990 would roll around, Richmond police had started putting SWAT team members on the roof of courthouses wherever Eugene Johnson and any one of his accomplices was going to court. And even though the murders would start between these two groups as early as December of 1982, when Eugene Johnson would get his first murder acquittal, but in 1987 is when it would get into full gear. And when I say this group of 8 people and their friends raised the murder rate, that would be an understatement. And some of them would even become a part of it over the years. One of them being Daniel Flax, who would be killed in June of 1989 when he was driving his sports car on the turnpike. In the vehicle he was driving, police would find guns and almost a kilogram of cocaine. His brother Donald, avenging his death, would end up with a wounding charge and would be on the doorstep of parole for a 5-year bid in October of 1990, but he would end up being set up on a jailhouse coke deal, and he would end up being sentenced to another 19 in the feds with no parole. Now, while Eugene Johnson was serving his time for shooting Daniel Flax back in 1983, he would be charged with another murder, as well as a conspiracy charge for attempting to order a hit on Richmond detective C.T. Woody, who had been investigating him and his brothers. Both his younger brothers, Reginald and Herbert, would be locked up on miscellaneous charges, but both were eligible for parole in July of 1990, but not much is said about them after that. Now, the youngest of the Brown brothers, Clayton Brown, would be murdered on May 31st, 1990, while both of his older brothers, Leonidas and Carlton, would end up being convicted on separate murder charges. These 3 sets of brothers will only be one entity in this deadly war, and it would take hours to break down everybody who lost their lives as part of it. Another notable person that should be mentioned would be a teenage hitman that was involved with this war, that had more bodies than Shorty Pop and allegedly started killing at the age of 12, a guy by the name of Racky Cloyd. Now, I'm not saying that this group was the only ones responsible for the bloodshed on the streets of Richmond in the early 1990s, but it's definitely no coincidence that when they were put away, the homicide numbers in the city drastically dropped.